Right, first of all, thank you so much, right, Alvin, for coming on board and agreeing to do this all the way over, right, in LA. The time difference now is what, 15 hours. Thanks for doing it. I know you're a busy man. You're in the middle of a lot of stuff and you had something on before that as well. Yeah, I do appreciate it.
Oh no, thank you very much for having me. I really wanted to do this, so I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Let me just run to a very quick introduction. First of all, my name is JD Wong. Right, I am a record producer, an audio engineer, a mixer as well. Right, and also I run a studio, right, called Studio 2105. Let me just briefly share on what the AES is, right? The AES is short for the Audio Engineering Society, and the AES is it's exclusively the only professional society that's devoted, right, to audio technology. The members of AES, they are made up of audio engineers, producers, mixers, scientists, researchers, students, enthusiasts, basically anyone and everyone. If you love audio, you can join, right, the Audio Engineering Society. Besides the being global worldwide AES, we also have our local section, right? And so AES Malaysia is the official local section of the AES worldwide. We have a Facebook page. We also have a members only WhatsApp group. And amongst all that, plus all the activities that you saw, right, there was showcased in the video just now. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce our special guest this afternoon, or in this case for you, evening, Alvin, right? Alvin Wee! Alright, yay! Thank you so much for joining us in AES Malaysia.
Yeah, thank you, JD. Hi guys. My name is Alvin. I am a record producer, a mixer. I don't own my own studio yet. I work out here in LA. I work a little bit in Malaysia and parts of Asia. I was very kindly invited by JD to come and speak a little bit about what I do and what I've been doing, and part of being in the music world and being in the post-production / film world, and also being in the video game world. So I thought to showcase that part of it, I was thinking maybe I should bring up a mix that I did that it was music forward, but it's a trailer. So it's a 3-minute trailer. It's for a video game. So there is obviously the sound design is a very heavy part of it. It's a heavy part of the industry. It's a very heavy part of like the community that does that kind of stuff. There's a lot of audio that goes into the sound design world that I may not work on a lot, but at least not my part of the world, where I'm not my part of the industry. But I come across it once in a while, and this is a very good example of that. There's also dialogue, so I kind of touch a little bit about like what mixing dialogue in a program material sounds like, and this being music heavy, there's a lot of emphasis on how I mix the kind of a score underneath this, and the way that it was handed to me and the way that I did it was kind of very focused around how the music sounded, as opposed to like just, here's a trailer, I'm going to dub it as dialogue first and then music. First of all, I do want to thank the guys at Amberland, which you will see the trailer in a bit, and I'll get JD here to play it for us. The trailer is just basically, it's a 3-minute thing, gives you a teaser of what the video game looks like, and the music's timed to the length of the clip of the trailer, so there's never a mistake. I have the tempo of the whole track mapped into my session. I am primarily a Pro Tools user and Logic Pro. I do not emphasize one or the other. I'm just saying whatever you're more comfortable with, use that. If you know how to do things, use whatever you're very familiar with. In this case, I'm going to speak more in Pro Tools terms because that's what I've been using for the last 8 years. Between that and Logic, I've kind of got all my bases covered because I deal a lot with like tempos and stuff, and we can go into like how that affects different DAWs when you switch tempos and all that. I'm going to go into a little bit about how I do my automation and what kind of EQs I use, what kind of reverbs I use and stuff like that, and then talk about a small couple of things about just the way things are presented when you get it out to the world, and like, loudness. We'll talk a little bit about that. Before I open up and share my screen, JD, if you wouldn't mind, can you play that clip for us so that we can just take a look at it real quick? And this is a trailer on the PlayStation YouTube channel. It was released last year. Sorry, I should say I want to thank the guys at Amber Lab for this. So if you take it away. Okay, great. So first of all, again, thank you to Amber Lab, which is the guys who did this. Josh and Mike, who are the people who came out of that concept video and also the subsequent video game, which is out. They graciously let me use this for this talk, and they're great people. They've got a small team, so this is done by a very, very tiny team of people, and I'm very kind of grateful for them to let me use it. And the only way I can kind of say thanks to them is like go and play some video games. Honestly, go buy the game. It looks cool. It's very fun, and I'm very happy to have worked on it. Obviously, I'm not going to go into anything with implementation of video games or like the why stuff and like the coding stuff of like taking audio and putting it into like the PlayStation thing. And I would say that also part of the reason I chose this is because musically, I think you hear the angklung in there and you hear a lot of this like ceruling and stuff. So it's actually regionally very similar to Malaysian music. Not really, but like, traditional. It's actually, I know the composer, so I'm going to talk very heavily kind of leaning on conceptually what the composer wanted as opposed to like what the audio director wanted. And so from the musical perspective, it was heavily based on Indonesian music, which is, our neighbor. And so regionally, there's some similarities, and it's not the same, but at least you can hear certain things. And they are Malaysian angklung, so like you can actually tell that like, it's slightly different, whatever. And that being said, this thing, when it was sent to me, was sent like, I don't know how many people here work with timecode, but the easiest way to kind of do this, especially when it's a trailer and it's not like a long piece of music, is I always try to put it on like some sort of timecode so I know. So the way I got this is I think we switch. I got it separately. So the composer sent me stuff, the sound designer sent me stuff, and then the dialogue mixer sent me stuff. Typically, I don't know how it's done in Malaysia, and like I think judging by my very, very few conversations, usually it's one person that handles it all. In LA and certain parts like New York, I think as well, there are people who handle everything, and that might be a kind of a more like boutique place, whereas like in a league, like a video game or in a film and all that, you have someone specifically recording the dialogue and then editing it. You have someone specifically doing the Foley, you have someone specifically doing the sound effects, and you have someone specifically doing the music. I'll try to talk a little bit about like, how people clean up dialogue and all that, and how I can speak to that and what I do and how I approach it from a more like I treat dialogue like vocals as a singer. So, it might be a little different. There might be some similarities and all that. But at the end of the day, I think, what we're trying to achieve is the same thing, which is to get some sort of cohesive mix that everyone, when they listen to, they're like, oh, okay, I get the emotional and impact on this. So I hope everyone can see the screen. JD nods his head, so it's great. This is my Pro Tools session, and usually I have my my video here, and we had to move it away. I believe it was because of how the tempo was that we couldn't spot it to 1 hour. But the music starts at literally 1 hour, but the audio had a little bit of lead in, so that's why I think that's what happens. How I usually have it set up is I'll have the reference, what they're listening to, which generally is like, if it comes from the composer, it's generally like 8 dB too loud, because musicians like the music loud, and that's fine. And you kind of got to balance it with like, again, I talk about a lot about balance. You got to kind of balance that against the dialogue, because at the end of the day, you're telling a story, and the visuals kind of dictate that. And sometimes there's big musical moments like in this, and we'll go into that. But in general, dialogue kind of takes precedence. So I'll have a reference, and I usually take it down to -24, -16 loose, depending. And knowing I have a 24 here, but on this one specifically, I knew because of my conversation with these people who were delivering it to PlayStation and also YouTube, they were like, okay, we have a very specific loudness standard that we want to go to, and I remember it was like minus 14 that they were going to. So meaning that minus 13, I think it was minus 13 because it was YouTube. And it's so basically if you hit your loops at minus 13 and you go above that, it gets turned down. And why would someone turn it down is because they want to keep the dynamic range and they want to have all your transients preserved. And sometimes you need that, and sometimes you can clip your transients like with drums and all that. But depending on the source, depending on the emotional impact you're going for, that makes a lot of difference in how you treat all your pieces of audio. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of my session organization because I think that's very important. That helps me visually understand where my head's at, and that helps me understand how to mix it later on, and that helps me access all my other stuff. So I work in a way where I have, on top of all my sessions, other than my master track has one plugin, which is this Insights. There's a ton of metering plugins. The TC Electronic is one. The Insight 2 is one. The New Gen Audio is another one. Waves is great. Anything that gives you an idea of what your measurement of loudness over time versus your short period is very helpful. Even if you don't look at it, sometimes it's good to have it there. Then you can see where your things flutters and all that. And like sometimes you have a histogram, but I just look at the integrated loudness in the middle, because when I play it through at the end, I can check and just make sure that I'm hitting the numbers I'm supposed to be hitting. So again, knowing it's YouTube and knowing it's going to PlayStation Store, minus 13 is my target. And I'm going to do a lot of dialogue, but I'm going to start music. So reference track and mix track. And what I do, because I can't show you, I have some faders here. I use an S3, and that's like, and something's wrong with my Ethernet right now, but usually I have my, you can see the mute here is actually very faded already. I usually have a reference track. It's on my left side because I'm just so using to have it. I lock two tracks there, one being the reference track and one being my mix print. Basically, I have everything internally routed. I do not use outboard, not because I don't love it. I just, just like right now, I might always have to come back for a recall, and any re-recording mixer worth their weight will tell you we're always going to come back to something, and someone's going to reopen it for some reason or other. So I cannot have a piece of very beautiful vintage gear that I take away and it changes and all that. So it's just not feasible, just practically not feasible. And maybe one day, but like plugins sound great now, so I don't think you really need them. So again, reference track and mix track is there. And then below that's my mix bus, which is my processing, which is like everything, all my track just runs through there at the end. And I'm running Ozone 9 right now, but sometimes I'll switch it up and have like different things in there. And this is just to catch overs. I don't, I'm not like limiting it up or anything. It like sometimes I'll do like a -2 dB or something. Oh, so I have -1.8. My ceiling's -1 there because I was trying to hit the loose. And that's my mix bus. And different project calls for different things, but generally it's either some sort of limiter, some sort of compressor, some sort of EQ. I do not use parallel on my mix bus because, especially when it comes to post-production stuff, if you do parallel stuff, unless you have a parallel for every stem, meaning for every dialogue, for every music stem, you are going to be running into issues when people are like, hey, can you send me just the M&E without the main dialogue? And you're like, oh, but I have there's my parallel and like the chain. Like, so things has to be as, processed as kind of direct as possible instead of like parallel stuff. And there are ways to do parallel stuff, which I would try to go into a little bit. So that's that. And I have a click here that I didn't print the click because I didn't feel it was necessary. Generally, if I was mixing just music, I would always have printed click, and it's usually like the MPC click or the UA click or anything. So that's just kind of the main kind of top of like where my final outputs are. And before I go through all this, my auxes are all kept underneath because I have separate stems for everything, and I kind of have my own templates. I recommend everyone building their own, just so that you're not kind of like trying to scramble and say, "Oh my God, like, what, like, where do I need to put this?" And like all this is organizational. So I like on this one, I just have low perk, high perk, bass, guitars, brass, orchestral stuff, lead vocals, which is not really lead vocals, it's kind of like choir, dialogue effects, and background vocals, which is like, sound. It's the sound effect, but I call it background vocals, I think, because I kind of rejig the pre-existing template for this. Everything's color coded. Just again, navigation. You want to jump around. You don't want your, like, if someone's sitting in the back and you're doing a playback, you don't want to be searching for stuff, and you want to be able to jump around your session really quickly. Some people do the mixer view, which is great. I don't personally do it, because I like to be able to see the waveform, because as you can tell, I do a lot of edits as I go along, and I will show you why it's very important for me, because some parts of what I mix I don't use like a plugin to do it. I might just like kind of go in and carve the audio out. More for like transients or like de-essing or like, things like that, of that nature, where they're like a lot of high end for unnecessary reason like this and all that. So I have my VCAs that control the different subgroups of things, one for music, one for dialogue, one for sound effects. And as you can tell, I have I kind of brought the front up because of the level kind of having a little bit difference, and you're trying to control dynamic before it hits the limiter. So rather than trying to crank down the limiter and limit the dynamics at the end, I wanted to keep the dynamics, kind of breathing a little bit. So I brought the front up. A lot of this automation is written by hand. I always joke that, if I can find one good fader, I'm great, and there are a couple of good options out there. I've just used the S3 because it's available. There's no really like kind of anything that you want to like, there's no like what's the best or whatever. Just find a fader that works and plug it in. If it goes up and down, like my just kind of a side note, like my friend who did a very, very, very big song, he was like using a fader port to mix all of it, like one of those PreSonus stuff, and like it's got a Grammy and blah blah blah, and Oscar nominated and stuff, and like it's not about the gear kind of thing. And I'm not trying to say that don't do something that's not accurate, just don't spend way too much time and too much resources into things that might take you down a road that you don't know until you try for a long time. So that's kind of my kind of rant a little bit about faders. So I have my VCAs here, and then I organized my session into folders, which I believe if you're in like Logic, or you're in Cubase, or if you're in Digital Performer, or if you're in, I don't know if Ableton has it, I know Reaper has it. Anyway, so it's just that, so when I collapse everything, I am not looking at a giant session. I see my my print track, my ref track, my master track, which usually is hidden, and my picture track. I know the colors seem very random, but like I've organized it so that I know my click's always red, my bus is always this color, this is the ugly blue that I have my print track. I input monitor. I don't send it out a physical output. I don't know why I do that. I think it's because I just want to see the meters here and know that everything's printing through, so that if I mute that and if something's playing through, I know that everything's not routed right. There are track presets I can build, and I don't know if Cubase does that or Logic does that, but there are many ways to do this. And my way of naming usually is if you see the first letter of everything, and this is quite common throughout this part, I guess in LA and I think New York as well. The first letter of every word just tells you what type of track it is. So like F, a small F is a folder, a small V is a VCA, a small D is a delay, a small R is a reverb, small A is an aux, and then if it's an output, I just, like there are certain kind of nomenclatures that you use just to keep yourself organized and stuff. That being said, let's get into the track, shall we? Because for the first part, it isn't a, like, it sounds like when you hear the track itself, it sounds very full, but there actually isn't a lot going on all throughout in terms of dialogue, sound effects, and all that. And that's why I was happy to mix it. There is a few things, but there literally is just one track of dialogue, and everything else is sound effects, And like, as you can tell, I didn't do a lot except write it, because the sound designer did their job. The vocal coach slash audio director slash dialogue editor did their job, so everything was clean. I don't have to do anything much to it, except I would say, when we get to it, is I think it's a big part of a big part of my kind of concept when it comes to vocals and vocal production is de-essing tends to bother me a lot, and I guess I should talk about it now, and then I'll show you examples of it, where, like, basically S's and C's and T's are just high-end information, and rather than put a plugin that de-esses, I go in and de-ess manually, because I feel that I get a better resolution and I think it sounds better, and I still can crank the high end if I want, and it still sounds natural. And I know singers who personally, like, in the studio, rather than putting a de-esser on them, they sing and manually de-ess themselves, and that's the coolest thing you can see in real life, because, like, it just sounds like this. Like, I could be putting 6 dB of high end, like, at 12K, and it's no problem, because, like, they do it themselves. And, like, that's kind of the, there's some caliber of musicians who are able to do that. But when it comes to, like, vocals, dialogue, quote unquote, it's mostly usually an 87 into like a Neve or like a LS 610 or something. And large diaphragm condensers tend to be bright, and depending on the vocals and all that, you might need to EQ a little bit more. I have a little bit of compression on this just to kind of even it out. And I don't think I even wrote it. Yeah, no. I decided that I was going to even it out with clip gain, and then compress it a little bit more just to tame the peaks. And that was conceptually how I was going to do dialogue. And I wrote, rather than have the dialogue kind of peak up and down, I instead made it consistent and have the music kind of go around it. So my way of taming dynamics is using the music as opposed to using the dialogue. So in the first part, when we first see it, there's this, like, I'll play it a little bit, but this is like,
Hi.
great. So I'm just gonna go to there right now, because that's like the intro part. Very sparse. You hear the angklung, you hear the flute, you hear you hear the you hear the sparkly stuff with the if you remember the visuals, there's this, like, kind of floaty bubbles, and there's this sound effect that kind of affects how he looks. So for me, that's priority, because that is a on-screen thing, and anything on-screen is always going to be priority. So I think they did a great job with the stuff, and I literally didn't have to do anything. They just sent me a track, and it was like, I mean, I turned it down a little bit, but it was very, very good. I thought it worked very well. And so all I worried about was that, is my music gonna distract from that, or is that gonna be a kind of supplement to it? And as you can tell, I kind of wrote a lot of the woodwinds. When it comes to orchestral instruments, my personal thing that I like doing, especially when it comes to flute, anything that has woods, anything that's blown, that's not brass. So I don't do this for, like, French horns, I don't do this for trumpets, I don't do this for trombones. But if it's a woodwind, like piccolo, flute, even clarinet and bassoon and oboe, English horn, any of that families, I tend to compress a lot, because I like the overblown sound, and I think the way that I mix it is, I would rather over compress and then bring it down in the mix so that it sits there, than, like, having it be dynamic and miss certain notes out. Because woodwinds tend to, if you consider the context of where it will be in a track, it's usually like it's going to be a lead instrument, or if it plays a chord, it's going to be, it's going to have, if it plays a chord, sometimes certain notes get missed out because they're not, the way they blow sometimes may not be consistent. So rather than use the automation to make up for the level, I compress the shit out of it and then use automation to bring out the kind of arc of the music. And so in this case, like, I mean, you can tell that there's always dips and there's always like, the end of phrases and things like that. And like, I can go in and clean all of that. But like, again, we have to be considerate about the time that was allocated to us to do this. Like if you're on a dub and you have 10 days to make a thing, then yeah, take your time, clean shit up, go through everything and all that. I didn't in this situation. I think I had like a day or two to wrap everything up. So, I had someone prep everything, put it all in, organize it for me. It's nice to have someone to organize it for me, but not always I get luxury. But like on this one, I had help. It was just easier. And then when I put it up, all I had to do was just start putting compressors, reverbs, and all that. Kind of talking a little bit more about Woodwinds, because also just the way I deal with it a lot. Because people like writing for woodwinds and they like to write melodies, right? Like this one is a melody. Like you can tell it's a note. It's like someone's playing a melody. So like with lead woodwinds especially, I don't necessarily kind of adhere to like the traditional orchestral music way of like it has to fit in an orchestral space. If it's in a space, then it would sound good. I'm like, I kind of throw that out the window, because like I know sometimes that's not the case with modern like orchestral music or modern score music, and I throw a lot of delays on my woodwinds and solo cellos a lot, and they just kind of they do this thing on the side. So if you hear this, it has this like really nice kind of like left right. I have like a quarter triplet and an eighth note, and it just tickles your ear a little bit, and you don't feel like it's just some boring flute playing a melody, And it's not kind of putting you get the sense of space, but you're not kind of just worrying about that. You just want it to kind of tickle your ear a little bit. And I know there's a lot of emphasis these days on ear candy and all that, and like this is one of the ways that I choose to do it with my stuff. And Echo Boy is always, the sound toy stuff is great, and I think it's a good thing. Everyone uses it now, so I highly recommend getting it if you haven't. They do like good sales all the time, and if you are, I don't know if AES offers like discounts or anything, but like I know if you show them that you are studying an audio production program, they give you like a 40% discount. I can't remember, and a lot of these plugins that I talk about here is things that are has to be easily accessible, so that if I'm moving from studio to studio and I don't have my laptop, I can recall my session. And also is kind of universally compatible with like different versions of the same software, different softwares and all that. So in case I need to transfer from like Pro Tools to Cubase for some reason, I can say, hey, if you're Fat Filter, pull this up. This is the cue, this is the frequency, this is what it is. So always trying to kind of think ahead and trying to make sure that I have ultimate compatibility down the line. So, back to this track, the strings aren't really doing anything, so I kind of turn it down a little bit and let it kind of sit in the back, and it's not doing a lot. So a little bit of reverb goes a long way, and you kind of just let it sit in the space. And between that, the woodwinds and this flutter that comes up, oh, that's nice. They've already had their kind of delay on it. I mean, as you can tell, the threshold is very like low, and like when you hit this part, it's actually like compressing like 5 or 6 dB, and on this hits, it's actually really loud, and you get that like attack from the woodwinds that most people may think, oh, that should be a performance thing, and like if you don't get it from the performance, do it with your own just do it with whatever tools you have. So, that being said, that's kind of where the beginning start. When the beginning starts, that's what's happening. It's just those are the few things that catches my ear. Those are the few things I pay attention on. There is the angklung, but the angklung's not really doing a lot. And I have a multi-band to take care of like things like this, because it's like synthy and you don't know if it's going to be loud, it's going to be soft, it's going to be low, and it's going to be high end. I can split it out. But then if I'm going to split out every single sound, I'm going to take like 3-4 hours to figure it out, relabel them and all that. So I'm just like, okay, it says keyboards. Clearly the intention of that was I just want this sound to be a thing. It came out from wherever it is, or it came from a synth or something. So I kept it and have a multi-band kind of happening at like low mids just to kind of tame it a little bit. So intro, going into the next section, as you can tell, like there's a dip in tempo, but then there's low end that comes in, and I will talk about exciter and like how you have saturate. I love saturations, and how that kind of grows and makes it a little cooler when it comes to a bigger section, and then we can hear the dialogue coming in.
The rats seem quite fond of you. They're usually timid. Something tells me you did not come to our village looking for forest creatures.
Hello, Spirit. I seek passage to the sacred mountain shrine.
Our village is bound to the shrine's energy. But that power faded long ago.
So, few things I noticed is the melody comes in and out between the dialogue, right? That's number one. Number two, you hear a solo vocal that's not really like a lead vocal. It's supposed to be this airy kind of thing. But that was processed for me, so I didn't have to do anything with it. It literally was just a little bit of a ride at the end of the tail because the reverb was kind of going over the dialogue, so I just kind of ducked it down a little bit. What I kind of want to talk about in this section primarily is just how the dialogue sits. As you can tell, I didn't process a lot. I had a trim there because I was trying to check something out. But the thing that kind of I was recalling is the idea of, I was talking about de-essing my vocals, and if you can see here, what I did was like, here are the big S's, right? And like I'm bringing them down 4-5 dB at any given point. This is 8 dB because like if you don't do that, it's quite offensive in my opinion. So here's without. Also, yes, the other thing I mentioned is also organizationally. If I was to do any edits or anything on my audio track, I just create a new playlist, and I don't know if like some DAWs have that or not, but just so that if I need to backtrack, I can do that. So just putting that out there. So here is the dialogue without de-essing, without compression.
Hello, Spirit. I seek passage to the sacred mountain shrine.
Right. It sounds all right, and it's borderline possible, but when you put a compressor on it.
Hello, Spirit. I seek passage to the sacred mountain shrine.
You like the first thing that pops out to me, and I don't know if everyone can hear this, but the first thing that pops out to me is it's just biting my head off. I can't hear the word spirit. I'll hear spirit. It's like it's just kind of distracting me, and what you want is to be immersed in the visuals of the video. So that part for me is distracting, and so I could put a like pro de-esser or whatever and do that, but I don't get like every time you say something's gonna be slightly different. So rather than do that, I go in and find each individual S's and like literally cut them on both sides and bring them down. So now this is it without compression.
Hello, Spirit. I seek passage to the sacred mountain shrine.
So you still get a little bit of the high end, but it's not as kind of offensive to me. So then when you compress it, you get
Hello, Spirit. I seek passage to the sacred mountain shrine.
I mean, I could turn it down a little bit more, but I think you might lose a little bit of the meaning. And this trick, I would flag two things. It is very important that you get your S's right when you have doubles, triples, quadruples in songs. Like that adds up, and that high-end energy is just a waste. And the trick can be also used in reverse, where if someone has a lisp and they don't say certain S's, you can go copy and paste that in. And that is something that I do quite often when like people, they like miss their S's or anything like that. Actually, one last thing is, and because we're in Malaysia, we speak different languages. So if you're doing this in Cantonese, or if you're doing this in Mandarin, or you're doing this in Thai, or even in French, where a lot of the words are very reliant on that high frequency information, de-essing it can be the worst thing you can do, because it will change the meaning of the thing, and that will affect the way people hear it. So this method I have found to be, for me, if you guys have better tricks, like I'll love to hear this. Is the kind of the most effective way of getting my thing across. It is time consuming because it's annoying, because you have to go in and find every single S, but the effect at the end of it, I mean, this translates across. Like my friends who does the Beyonce stuff and all that, they do this all the time, and like, because like Tony cranks all his high end and stuff like that. So you want to be able to do that without being offensive. So enough about de-essing, because I know it's boring, but like all this boring stuff usually is the one that takes the most time, and it makes the most sense to kind of do it when like I'm not trying to speak and trying to get through this whole thing. So other than that, this section isn't really tricky as well. There was this keyboard that was doing this, and I just wanted a little bit of the hit, because it works with the rest of the track, and that's kind of the kick. I don't have a kick here. I have an uncle, but the uncle isn't doing a big low end, and you want something to hit, so that's why
The rats are quite
do that.
fond of him. They're usually timid.
So we're starting to introduce like low end information into this whole thing. So like, as you can tell from the waveform, like it starts kind of jumping up. So I'm like careful as well, because when I got this track, I just played all the way through. I wanted to make sure that I left enough room for dynamics to grow. With movies, with video games, and not like record where like you're hitting -10 consistently. Your dynamic range can sometimes go from like -50 all the way up to like -0.3. So like kind of keeping that at the back of your mind is a very helpful way of like making sure that you have room to grow, and like you're able to kind of manage both of that. Because like if you do that and you go, let's say, and this bleeds into Atmos, like if you do something that's ultra dynamic, Atmos is not going to know how to deal with it, and then like you hit it too hard, then your binaural thing starts hitting, and it's just going to be a chaos, right? So worrying about dynamics is a huge thing for me. And so what I do is I have a VCA that controls my music, and that's my main VCA where I dip in and out of the dialogue. And rather than going in and mix all of that, I've already set everything levels wise internally, so the music works as a unit. Then I have to kind of think of it as a macro thing, as opposed to like the internal balance and go up and down. That is very important in films, because sometimes when I mix a score, I don't have the final dialogue, and like a dubbing mixer is like, oh, like just send it to me and I'll have it on a fader. So having a little bit of more of that control is great. And this is one part that I kind of stole from the 5.1 setup that I have, which is the as you can see here, it says .L, but it's basically one of the channel from the left and right of a boom. I take any boom in a track, which is this, right? It's just big booms in the sessions, and so I take the hits of it, like just the kind of the beginning parts of it, and I run like a sub, like like you can have a voice of God or like a LFE thing, and typically I just send it directly to the LFE on a 5.1 mix or like on an Atmos mix. You send it to the bed or whatever. But for this, it's a stereo mix. It's going on YouTube. There is no LFE. So but I still wanted that low end information because when you hear it in the context, it's still going to sound very loud, very proud. And my favorite plugin of choice is Low Ender. I've used this for like, I don't know, the last 10 years of my career. And it's $30. I don't know what it is in Malaysia, so convert it to like 100 odd ringgit. Best decision I've ever made in my life, spending that money when I first came out as a student. So it tells you how much I love it. And it's the easiest thing to do. You put this in, you low pass everything, you send it through here, and you get this like really nice. It's a very solid, and it's like a bass synthesizer basically, or like kind of the sine wave trick. And so when you combine both of that, you get this really nice, you get this really solid, and all it does is just give you a little more excitement. So moving on, that is my low end, and my high end starting to build. My mid range is still kind of staying the same. As you can tell, there isn't a lot of processing on my percussion. It's greatly recorded samples. I'm not trying to reinvent anything here. And again, I'm moving so quickly. I don't want to try to do something else that's already great. The only thing I did that I started kind of adding to was this Neutron, which is an isotope plugin. Again, no. Again, it's one of those cool sounds, right? And I think I did some harmonic saturation. So I do a lot of multi-band saturation when it comes to getting my high end out rather than like boosting my high end. I use the exciter a lot. I think the previous version is called Trash or something. The crossover frequencies don't matter as much as like what the information is doing, because sometimes you can have like sounds like a loop, right? If you have you have an Indian rhythm where it goes tiki, but then you also have your high end steels and stuff like that. You might want to bring out the high end without compromising the low end. So I just do a crossover and I just kind of compress but anytime you do saturation, you're basically compressing the sound. But if you do frequency-based saturation, you get this really nice, like cool, like texture to it that's a little distorted, but then it makes you cut through the mix a little bit more. And everyone loves a good distortion. I'm using Neutron on this. This is Neutron 3, but I recently discovered one that's free that's called Neural Q. It's a great free plugin. It's awesome. There's 3 modes of distortion. It's buggy on one of the mode, but I'm not bothered. I have one setting on this, and I just put the drive to full, and this is my default. As you can tell, it's AW default. So free plugin, go check it out. Great high end, and apparently there's some learning or some AI learning thing, which I haven't had time to try it, but it works on everything. Works on pianos, works on guitars. I love it for acoustic guitars. I love it for vocals. Anything that you just want a little sparkle on the end. And the saturation helps a bit higher. So here we go. Anyway, so moving on, we go to the next section where it's starting to kind of build up action. And again, keeping in mind that everything's starting to get denser, but it's denser kind of in its internal thing musically. So what I try to do is make sure that I know, okay, this is the big action scene. She's going to start running around. Dialogue's done. Okay, stop talking. We're bored with you talking now. We want the music to take front and center. So what happened is they finished talking, and then I just kind of write it up a little bit to kind of sound effects.
Traps.
So ironically, even though it sounds like the sound effects got softer, it didn't. The sound effects was kind of on its own track. What happened was actually, relatively because of the kind of automation, the music ducked down quite a bit, and I had to have them kind of sit back before I really push them up to kind of take over that section. So it feels like the sound effects start getting softer. But instead of doing that, like I said, conceptually, when I was doing this mix, it was all about trying to get things to kind of work around the sound effects. Because, like sound designers, they work as they go. So like, as you work, you're like, oh yeah, this is a bit big hit, it's a bit soft hit. So I'll play that again, but like you hear that even though it sounds like the sound effects getting louder, it's actually the music starting softer going to become louder.
Trapped spirits linger here, tangled in the tragedies of our past. You must help these spirits if you wish to reach the mountain shrine.
It's okay. You have to go now.
So that section, generally when things are softer, just by, we talk about perception of loudness, right? Is it the Fletcher-Munson curve or whatever? When music gets softer, I tend to bring things with low frequency energy up a little bit more. That's like non-transient low end frequency energy. So like in scores, you have strings a lot, and sometimes when emotionally you're supposed to sit back, like the composer will write a lot for bass and cello. Rather than keep the bass and cello down, I would bring it up to kind of give that forced perception of it being balanced with the high end. Because at like minus 30 dB, minus 35 dB, the low end sounds like it's missing. So I wrote it up naturally here because I remember doing this after doing that big dip. It wasn't a big dip, but like there's a little bit of a dip here, right? So I brought it up to kind of make up for that because high end always cut through. Anything past up a higher G, I think you'll be good. But with low end, you try to want to keep that, make sure that it's big, it's strong, it's solid. And as you can tell, there also the other thing I want to bring up is like I use trim automation as well. So after you automate, then you have an additional layer and you can write over your automation. And like I know this sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't, but like it's just if I've written something and I kind of like do it. Let's say if I've done this to tame my dynamics, I do another thing called a love ride, which is just kind of a I guess the phrase is like emotional ride, right? Like sometimes you want your vibe to go, and like sometimes like you're pushing it because you're trying to feel the track. And I'm a big advocate of that. Like I think music shouldn't be sterile, especially when it's like if you're writing things, you should always have it kind of get the listeners think like it, even though it's a trailer, it's supposed to be exciting. You don't want it to be flat the whole way. Even if you're limiting things to the max, you still have your internal dynamics, and I think that works very importantly when it comes to even more when it comes to orchestral music.
But I've got a question for you. Previously, you mentioned that you kept your dialogue, pretty much your dialogue in the mix, your dialogue volume, consistent throughout. What's the consideration? Is it because the dialogue function as the anchor, so to speak, in the mix?
In this context, yes. The dialogue here is more like narration, so it functions as the anchor. So it's not gonna stay. It's kind of static to me. It's like kind of someone telling the story, and it's not really like you're not putting it in a scene. You're not putting it in like a environment, if you will. Like if I was doing this in surround, and like I had one speaker for my dialogue, which is like the center speaker, like like when we did Encanto, whatever, they would have like the dialogue in the center, or like specifically, you stay clear away from that. Then you don't really have to consider that as much about like writing around the dialogue. You still have to, but like it's not as prevalent as this, where like I am, doing like 10 dB writes between the lowest and softest parts, right? And I'm trying to kind of do this because I'm more music forward than I am dialogue. Again, my passion is more in the music, so obviously everyone's bias kind of seeps into their mixes, and that's part of how you make your mixes. Like you bring your personality to your mixes. Like in this one, my consideration was like whoever edited dialogue was already doing it in the way where it works for them. I declipped some stuff, but like didn't do anything crazy. You know, brought a couple of stuff up, but like nothing too much, and it was just to keep it kind of here, you know, like, and so everything kind of danced around it a little bit more. There isn't like, I'm not like in a warehouse talking to each other, unfortunately. I treat this one especially as a voiceover. Don't need to. I hope that answers your questions. The other thing I meant to say was, that's also a conversation between you and the director, right? The director's like, go edit, or like, we want this to be music for it. And like, I know for a feature, like, you know, they were like, hey, we want the music to be like very heavily featured because it's part of their marketing for their video game as well. And this is originally written for the trailer that will be then, you know, the thematic material we then repurpose into the score. So you're like, okay, so this has to be right to sound right for the, you know, thing. And so that's what I was kind of thinking of and doing as well. I'm almost done with this. All right, this is, so you know, the next section is just big action. When it's big action, everything's loud. There's ways to craft it. I'm not doing a Michael Bay film or a Christopher Nolan film right now. I just want things to be loud. I just want things to hit. I just want it to feel like a big action sequence. So
cannot stay here, Spirit. You must move on.
The path of a spirit guide is a lonely one.
okay, so big action. I mean, that really isn't really, you know, much talk about. More distortion, more. You know, it's like Han said, more. The one thing that I want to point to is reverbs. Like I don't know, you know, I don't know if anyone had any question about that. I use Valhalla Vintage Verb here because I'm not too picky. Like I don't need my own precasties to make things sound good. I sometimes just use the Pro Tools stock reverb. I chose this because it looked pretty that day and I put it up. I'll be honest, like it all works. You know, again, I talk about inserting your personality a lot to it because audio is like, it's audio, you know, like there's many ways to do it. You're gonna hear something differently every time. So might as well craft something that becomes your own and like make it unique and do that in a way that makes you feel great when you listen to it, you know, and that's kind of injecting personality to it. I would say that this was not the original reverb on all these tracks. I think for just to keep it simple for like students, is like I'll use this vintage verb, but on some of them, I believe on a couple of versions back, I use Seventh Heaven, which is Liquisonics. I've been using that on everything I do. It's basically the software version of the Precasti. Okay, it's loading. Looks like this, kind of like, you know, colors and all that looks like Precasti. Is great. Love this plugin. It's the closest I can get without having to have a plugin, without having to have a hardware. And I think they use some IR technology that doesn't take too long to load. So, you know, that's why I use it. But my Valhalla is my go-to when I'm doing things. These days, when I use like things like Valhalla, I kind of use it as inserts because I think it just works. So it's easy to do like kind of inserts as opposed to sends. And I use my Seventh Heaven on sends. And on bigger projects, I tend to have 2 reverbs on each stem just to pull up when I need them. Usually one's a plate. So I use the little plate a lot, which is the Sound Toys one. And then I'll either use the Seventh Heaven or Revive for Pro Tools, or like, I know with Cubase you get a version of the Liquisonics reverb. I don't remember which one. That one sounds fantastic. I love it. I just don't have it because I didn't buy it because I have enough reverbs. So, you know, they all work. They really do. That's kind of my kind of short rant about reverbs. Like, don't spend way too much money. It's not worth it. It's cool to have in your arsenal, but most of the time you don't need to. The other thing that I want to bring up was that ending section where he spoke, and there's this like big ramp to get that like melodic idea out. That melodic idea is like a huge signature. It's like the logo of the music. When you hear that, you see in the trailer, you see the title card and all that. So it's a very big part of the thing. But the problem in this situation is it had that logo, but it had dialogue at the end. Because, you know, it's a trailer. You want to kind of make sure that you get everything in or whatever, right? So I had to write it up to get that big effect, like, this is the logo, and then bring it down so that the dialogue had space to do it. So I'm going to play it for you real quick so you can pay attention to that and see how it worked.
The path of a spirit guide is a lonely one.
And so that last ending section, the one thing I kind of bring focus to is after the dip, when it goes back up. Like, if you can see from the audio file, it actually is already kind of like tapering off. But what I like to do, especially vocals, I like to write the end of reverb tails to come back up so that it gives you, you hear a little bit more of the tail, and you hear a little, like, I'll put like some grit at the end of a reverb sometimes to just give it like a little more dirt and like a little cool analog feel or whatever. And then I'll just write it up at the end of it and have it come back down. That's a trick that I do a lot. It's not a reverb throw. Like, it's not like I'm like throwing at the end of it. It's just that the reverb's already there. I just want to turn the back up so that I can hear more of it by the audience. I don't do that with mono reverbs because mono reverbs just take over the center, and if you have things there, it kind of, muddies up the center. So it's usually something really wide, and I'll kind of write the back at the end. And that's basically the end of my mix session. I hope, that I know I went through quite a bit of stuff, and like, I'm always happy to answer. And I know, like, JD would like to get some questions as well, and I'm happy to answer them. But like, if we don't, like, we can either stay or like, always feel free to reach out to me, and like, I'm always happy to answer any of these questions. It's no secret. I don't think it's a secret. Everyone should be able to do this. It's not rocket science. And my philosophy is we're not saving lives. So like, if I can do it one fader, like, why can't everyone else? And so yeah, we can talk later on. But JD, if you wanna, I will kind of throw it back to you, and we'll see where you go from here.